Hey, what's up? I'm going to try something new and do some longer form stuff, look at some mix breakdowns and production bits and pieces, and see if people like it and if people enjoy it. So the first one I'm going to do today is a song called Breakdown by a band called For Kingdom's Cause. Now, I also did a lot of the production on this one and played guitar, bass, did a lot of the programming. It was work from an old demo that the band had. They just wanted it updating, refreshing. So I've kind of gone in and done some bits and pieces, and this is what we've come out with. So why don't we take a listen to one of the choruses, and then we can dive into some bits and pieces on the mix and the production. So you can see, a lot of the session, what we've got going on here. Drums, always at the top for me, going into bass, guitars, production, and vocals, and then I've got my buses at the end. I'm going to set up a loop around the chorus, and we can have a little look at some things that we've got going on in the mix. So I'll start on the output. Sometimes I will, depending on what the context of the song is and the tracks, I'll master in a separate session. Sometimes I'll do it in the session. In this case, I've done it inside it. So I always start with, I'm mixing into a limiter to kind of get the transients feeling right. And then when the mix is pretty much done, I'll start adding mastering chains. So to get some level and some volume, I'm running into two clippers and then finally the limiter. So these two clippers are kind of doing different things. One's this hard clip, which is just taking off any top snare transients. You can see I'm boosting it by 7, but I'm turning it down by 7 here. Then this clipper here is full loudness. So then I'm not hitting the limiter too hard. So let's see if we can watch what these guys are doing. So this would be the first one, second one, and then lastly the limiter down the bottom. So it's not being slammed, they're each doing a little bit, and I didn't want to crush it too hard because it's quite a full-on track like in the choruses, and when I was pushing it too hard it just sounded a little bit mushy. So that's what we've got going on the output. Prior to that, we have a few different things. I'm running this match EQ just to keep the consistency between, there was a few different mixes that I was doing, and I ended up leaving it on. So it's just a really kind of broad strokes EQ at about 35%. I'm using this plugin. I'm not doing any compression on it, but I've just got the mix at 23% as on mid-side. It adds some nice width. Before that we have a bit of soothe, just doing some, taming here and there, nothing crazy. EQ and the Gregwell, so these kind of go in tandem for me. You don't really need to do a ton with Gregwells. It's a bit of a de-murking plugin. So let's bypass it and turn it on. So bypassed. A little less muddy and stuff, but it does do some stuff to this kind of upper mid-range, so I end up dipping it out a little bit. And the first in the chain, I've kind of gone backwards here, sorry, is this Mark EQ, boosting a little bit of sub and some top end on the 40k range. So that's the master. The mix bus, we have a little bit of EQ there, some saturation, just a little bit blended in, Townhouse bus compression, this purified plugin, which is like a tape thing, which is great for adding some really nice thickness to the low end and kind of sheen and crystal clear top end. lastly, we're going to inflator to get some level. Let's check what we're doing in terms of mix bus compression. Yeah, we're not doing like, if I was going to do it again, I'd probably drop it down a touch to like there, so we'll just leave it like that. And then yeah, EQ, which I've already talked about, that's at the start. Cool. So I've got an instrumental bus, so the vocals are going into that mix bus and all the instruments go to an instrumental first, which has the saturation, a little bit of EQ. I'm not really doing anything with this one, it's just kind of on there. All I'm doing with this guy here is a bit of mono, making under 70 hertz. Then I'm using this multi-band compressor just to control some dynamics and stuff. It's probably why I don't need to hit the mix bus too hard, to be fair. Let's see what we're doing with this. Yeah, so it's just controlling that low end because the kick's quite subby. So that's just making sure that it doesn't get too unruly. Before we go into FabFilter Saturn, which I'm just adding a little bit of drive above 173 hertz. And then I'm side chaining, I'm using track spacer here, side chaining to the vocals, so as the track plays it's just dipping out some of the upper mid-range to give a bit more clarity to the vocals, just blended in 7%, so not doing too much but just enough. Onto drums. We've got different buses actually here. So first off, we've got drums. I've got a parallel, a main, and then they're both going to this drum master. On the master I've got Saturn, just doing a bit of saturation and some EQ here. So both buses have Saturn again. First of all, the first one there, so the crossover points are set at the same to maintain phase coherence, but I'm driving it a bit harder on the parallel to get a bit more excitement out of it. They've both got the same EQ on. There's some like phasey stuff that can happen with bus processing in Logic, so I try and copy the plugins across even if I end up bypassing one. So we've got some drum bus EQ. Then on the main drum bus we are using the distressor as our drum bus compressor, and then that is being got a little bit of clipping afterwards. So let's check out what the drums are saying on the main drum bus. And then the parallel, I've bypassed the compressor. We are doing some transient shaping, so adding some attack and sustain, and then we are clipping it harder. So just to give you an idea of what, let's just mute the main drum bus, just listen to the parallel. Yes, it's mainly adding some source to that snare. After that we have a bass bus. On that bass bus we've just got a little bit of EQ, some dynamic stuff going on. The limiter just to make sure it doesn't peak and go over too high. Then side chaining the low end of the kick into the bass with Soothe. Quite a cool bass tone. Guitar bus. Gullfoss is quite a cool one, particularly if it's digital amps. I quite like the tame setting on it just to smooth out that harshness if I'm using plugins. Just does a nice thing to the overall EQ curve. Then we have Soothe afterwards, doing some stuff to the upper mid-range. Saturn, which I'm mainly using for the EQ to brighten it up. Then we have a little bit more bus EQ, so we're getting rid of some low end, some dynamic mid-range stuff. And then I'm side chaining the snare into track spacer, which just clears some space for the snare every time it hits. So let's try and put these all on the screen in some kind of order, and then listen to what the guitars are doing. Yeah, so the guitars in this one work in conjunction with the synth production, and all I have on that bus is C4, just controlling the mid-range when it gets a bit too, when the synth starts stacking up, you don't get too much mid-range. And then again, we are doing some snare side chaining with Track Spacer. Then lastly, we have our vocal bus. What we have on here is some tape, saturation, some EQ, and this compressor, which I think works really well on vocals. Now with the bus EQ, you know, some of the stuff, this looks a bit weird, but it's done sort of in conjunction with everything else in the mix. So there's some dynamics, that there's a lot of vocal harmonies that happen in certain points, so the low mid range gets a bit unruly, so which is why I've got some dynamic stuff going on. And these, you know, these aren't crazy moves. This is like what, just about 2 dB we're ducking out here, little shelf 1.2 dB at 3.5K. So these will be adjusted, same with the guitars and anything else as we're going on with the mix.
This ends today, night turns today, have your way, Yahweh.
Cool, so let's look at some of the individual instruments then. Drums were tracked at a studio called Orchard Studios, which is where I work out of when we're tracking drums and stuff. And the production for this one, it needed to be like a polished, slick, modern sounding production. So I knew from the get-go that we were going to be supplementing with some drum samples to get the sound that we wanted. And I kind of have that in mind when we are tracking. So let's have a look. So that snare's got that nice splat to it. The kick's quite thumpy and subby, really driving the track along. Individually, if we take out, let's take out the samples and see, because they're doing some heavy lifting on this. This is probably going to sound strange without them, but okay, here we go. Yeah, so they're doing a lot. Kick wise, we've got a kick in, a kick out, and then this kick trigger sample. They are being bussed together, and then on the bus we've got a few different moves. Again, I like to kind of stack stuff. I find also if you are processing samples and real drums together on a bus, it kind of glues them a little bit more. Not necessarily just with compression, but even just EQing them together helps them to sit together a little bit more. One thing I also like to do is use auto align to make sure the samples and the real mics are time and phase aligned, because there's some delay compensation stuff going on, and it doesn't quite, if you're leaving trigger running, which I am leaving trigger running, you know, I should print them, but hey, whatever. In particular, you kind of need to pay attention to that. I've also got some side chaining. I've made some key spikes. So I've taken the MIDI from the tracks, printed them down as like a little blip. I will show you. These key spikes here are, you know, kick, snare. So then I'm using that to trigger the gates on the kick and the snare, because it's super accurate. So that obviously adds some more latency and stuff that needs to be compensated for. But it's a really accurate way of getting your gating correct. So back to the bus, we've got some EQ, transient stuff, some more EQ. I'm doing on the kick, adding some R bass for that sub, and then Saturn, and then we just gaining up at the end. So this is what the kick drum sounds like. Snare wise, again, everything's being bussed together, and then on that snare bus, just a little bit of EQ, some compression. This compressor is really cool for snare drum. How hard am I hitting it? Let's have a look. It's quite a fast attack, just controlling that transient a little bit. After that snare drum, we are EQing. This Psy EQ is great. I'm cranking the low end, cranking some more into the mid-range as well. It's a really cool plugin. Saturn again, and then we are clipping afterwards. How much are we clipping? Like 0.6. So we've got the snare top and bottom. Again, there's nothing crazy going on here. I'll just quickly show you some of the plugins I'm using on the snare. So I'm hitting the tape first, some EQ, then I'm gating it. A little bit more like top end, low end stuff with the EQ, hitting the compressor, and then I'm clipping that natural snare. So I'm doing snare top, snare bottom. Then we've got 3 trigger tracks. First one, which is Barlin Audio sample pack, which are one shots, and then this snare ring, which I'm not sure where it's from. So this is all one shots in here. Then we have a more ringy. Let's solo that one. Sorry, that was this one, the one shots. Then we have a ringier snare. So that's adding a bit of room as well, actually. And then what's this last one here? A bit more high pitched. Again, just adding some sizzle, a little bit of room. I'm not doing loads on those because they're already kind of pre-processed, so you don't really have to do a lot. Maybe a bit of EQ to get them sitting where you want them. But they are then being blended with that natural snare drum. So a lot of the snare work in this song is just bam. It feels kind of one-shotty, and Dan, as a player, he's very hard. So I wasn't too worried about going overboard on the one-shots because I thought it sounded cool. And if it sounds good, then do it. Toms, there's not a load of toms in this song. They're just played together at certain points. It's mainly kick and snare. But again, we've got a natural toms. I'm doing similar processing on the samples, to be fair, and taking out a lot of that sustain, compression, EQ, clipping, and then they're being bussed together, taking out some more of that low mids. Yeah. And then we've got some sample toms blended in with the natural ones as well. So, yeah, not a lot of toms, so we're not going to talk about that too much on this one. Then we've got the overheads, which of course are the natural overheads from the kit. So this is just the sound from the room. Yeah, I don't know. I felt that the right overhead was just quieter. I don't know if that happened exporting or what, but I just boosted it a little bit. Some tape, some EQ cleanup stuff, taking out some low end. Compression, mainly to kind of control that snare, and then we are soothing the upper, like, ringy harmonics. Nothing crazy, so this isn't even 100%. Then we've got some extra crashes, which I dropped in some extra crash samples on the downbeats just to emphasize it a little bit more. We have a hi-hat and we have a china, which we've just got some real kind of basic EQ on, and that's that. Then the room sound. So the room is where it makes a whole lot of difference, and I did something slightly different on this mix. I'd watched a Nail the Mix, and I can't remember now what band it was, but they were doing a really cool thing with samples, triggering room samples individually for each drum, which I've done here as well as the extra rooms, but then using transient designers and stuff to really kind of control the sustain and attack. This song not so much, because it's kind of all played at a very similar velocity, but other songs I've done for this EP, there's more automation on mainly the sustain of the rooms to bring it up and down. But from the MIDI, I've triggered some room samples for the kick, snare and toms, and then I'm treating those all in here, taking out stuff that I don't want, compressing them individually to get a cool sound, and then I'm adding some width on the snare, making sure that the length of the drum is where I want it, using transient shaping. I've got some natural rooms and some MIDI rooms, which I'll show in a second, but everything's going to this room bus, and then the room bus is being treated together as well. Decapitator is great on a room track. This E setting, I can't remember what it's for, but it sounds cool, just kind of getting it where you want it. Cleaning up some stuff. Now, the compressor here, this Logic compressor is very clean, and it's just doing a little bit of compression when that snare's hitting. I'll show you now what this compressor on the bus is doing. If I were to bypass that compressor, it just makes that snare drum sit back a little bit more in with the rest of the rooms and not poke out as much. It's cool. Some transient stuff, and then the limiter just to make sure that we're not going crazy. So those individual room samples sound like this. I should also mention that this is going, the buses are going to the parallel bus at varying amounts. It's mainly the snare that we're hearing in that, but all the others are going into it. So those are our kind of triggered samples. We've got a mono room track. This is a cool plugin. I'm just kind of reducing the sound of the kick and the hi-hats and the overheads in the room using this Acon Remix Drums plugin. If I bypass that plugin, cymbals are crazy. It's a small room, so there's a lot of cymbal. That is really useful. Then we are EQing. I'm trying to get more snare out of this. That's what I want out of that mono. Crushing it with Devil Lock, which is cool. Then we have the natural rooms, which is stereo room track. All we are doing on here, we're hitting the tape, doing some EQ. Then we are compressing it. I've got a blend on this compressor. This is great on drums. So here's the stereo rooms. So those natural rooms have also got the cymbals in, obviously, and they're just really helping glue it all together, because we then have another room track, which I'm just using the room sounds from Modern and Massive, and I'm doing a bit of processing on here. Then we got a couple of different reverbs. For my drum verb, I'm using this late one, which is cool. Snare verb, we've got this Lexicon reverb, again, which is nice, timed it to the track. And then True Verb, this Snare Trap plugin, Snare Trap preset, taking out the direct, it just adds some extra width. So these are the three reverbs together. Yeah, and then you put all that together and you've got the drum sound. Sick. Okay, let's take a look at bass. and that is Parallax, one of my presets that I've tweaked. Crazy EQ, so like, because we've got so many synths and guitars and stuff, it needed some drastic stuff. And like this boost, again, this isn't a normal move, but I just needed more top end from it, and that got it. After cutting out some like stuff that I didn't like, boosting that, it just worked. Sometimes you got to do weird stuff like that. R-Bass into a multi-band compressor and then being glued together with the distressor. Yeah, sounds cool. Like, if I take out that, it's just for interest, take out this crazy shelf. Hear that bite, that upper mid-range just really come through, becomes a lot less muddy. Then we have a synth bass, and I'm doing some saturation, EQ cleanup, and just leveling it out a little bit. The synth bass sounds like this. And it's just tucked in there with the bass. And then later on in the song, oh no, we don't. We've got another bass track here, which I've not used, so I don't know why that's there. Cool, so that's all what's going on with the bass. Guitar-wise, we have a few different guitar layers. We've got a main rhythm track, which is Archetype Gojira. We've got this mixed wave Tube Screamer before. We're going into Gojira. What are we doing on the cab? 57 and a 414. These are the settings. So I'm EQing a little bit, some mid-range, upper mid-range stuff. This is just for the chugs. Both the rhythms are going to a bus. I'm using Soothe. I just find this plugin's really fizzy. So I'm trying to particularly like this move here. Let's listen to the rhythms first of all, actually, and then I'll show you what I mean. That like 10k-ish. It's just horrible. This is a cool move. So there's a guy called Brody McKeegan who is on YouTube and on TikTok, and he was doing this on his guitars, and I thought it sounded awesome. Really nice effect on the compression, just like at 6%, just blended in very slightly. Does something really nice. It's like a modern kind of sound. So we're doing some OTT. We are doing some saturation, a little bit of EQ, which should have been done in context with the rest of the track. And then I ended up compressing the guitars even more with Renaissance Axe because it just worked. Glued everything together. More solid with that. So that's the main rhythms. We've got a low octave, which has got some very similar bus processing on it. So I won't go into that too much, but it sounds like this. So these low octave guitars are really cool. They're very simple. They're just like single string kind of stuff, obviously pitched down an octave, but blended in with the rhythm guitars and the bass, it just helps to kind of glue things together and makes it feel a lot thicker in the mix. That low mid-range sounds cool. Let's look at that tapping guitar, because that is a really cool part. I've printed the tone down, but it was Archetype Gojira. So I'm taking out all of the low end and the fizzy top end because I didn't need it. OTT for some compression, Vertigo for a little bit of saturation, and then I'm using the tremolo plugin at 1:1 rate, so it's just moving back and forth between the bars, only 20%. But it just adds this extra width that wasn't there before with that tapping track, particularly when you've got a vocal right down the middle. It just kind of moves it out of the way a little bit. Yeah, love that part. It's a really cool little part that I came up with just randomly. We got two EBOs that are running the entire song, just doing these drones. I've got a high and a low. Nothing crazy at all in terms of processing, just this. They just add this real ethereal, like, ambient, really cool texture to the whole song, and it all kind of glues together because they're running through the whole track as well. So those are going the whole way through. What other guitars have we got? Because that's the chorus. The verses, we've got these cleans, which again would be some sort of Gajira. It's very similar processing on these buses, but the EQ will just be slightly tweaked between them. But we've got these cleans. I mean, they're not even edge of breakup. They're just less distorted than the main rhythms, but they are running. We've talked about the EBOs. This little guy here. That's more edge of breakup. So it starts, obviously, the intro kicks in, you've got this big wide part, then it comes down to a bit more mono, and then the verse kicks in, and everything gets a little bit wider again. So it's all about creating those different shifts in the size of the song to make it flow. We've got these little filter guitars as well, which happen at different parts, which are, yeah, just a filter guitar. And that is our guitar parts. Then we've got a bunch of synths, and the synths are cool. We have this dirty synth, first of all. These have all been printed down from the pre-production session into the final mix. So it's almost like a guitar-ish kind of synth, really thickens it out. Then we've got this pad. There's not a lot of processing on any of these. If there is, see, look, this has got the most processing of all the synths because it has an extra compressor, but I'm taking out all the low end and then compressing it slightly. So this is a vocal pad. There's a lot of processing that's been done on these prior to coming into this session. My thought process behind programming a lot of these things were obviously to create some kind of ambience and texture, but we're also tying in different elements of the mix with each other to make it kind of cohesive. So like that synth, for example, is reinforcing what the vocal melody is doing. And then you've got the dirty synth, which is kind of gluing in the guitars. So they're all kind of working together to create this, not wall of sound, but this really glued and cohesive mix. So in the second half of the chorus, when the tapping guitar part comes in, we've got this little synth piano. Again, it's reinforcing that vocal hook. I really like stuttering things because I think it helps with the rhythm and like pushing the track along. So we've got this stutter synth here in the chorus. Just keeps the pace and stuff going. So those are our main chorus synths. then we've got a few different things in the verses, like this pad. Then as the verse kind of kicks up a gear in the second half, we've got this extra synth just kind of emphasizing that change. Got a little string part. I've exported it, I've called it strings, but the track is beats. So this is a little drum beat. So things are getting smaller before the chorus hits in, but that beat is just kind of kicking it along. Yeah. Then in the second verse, where everything kind of picks up, we got some extra synths. Again, that's kind of stutter thing. Got this choir swell, which is pretty cool. Again, with a little stutter. We'll get on to that little stutter part. What is quite important in these sort of modern productions are your transitions. So you've got rises and things and swells and drops and swoops going into different sections just to kind of help them hit. And you can see here there's like this white noise drop that happens. We've got other little rises going into choruses and stuff. So they're not there to be super obvious, they're just there to help with the transition. And I do love a tambourine in a chorus. Cool, so those are our synths and rises and swoops and stuff. Let's have a look finally at vocals. Lisa is an awesome singer. Just gonna remove these empty insert slots. Cool. Okay, let's take a listen to her isolated main vocal first of all.
Turns to day, night turns to day. Have your way, Yahweh. I'll
So even before I started mixing, I've gone through and clip gained down a lot of these breaths. In the backing vocals, I've removed them entirely, but I've clip gained them down for the main vocal because I think they're important to be there, but it was a bit too breathy. Same with, I went through and clip gained down a lot of the S's and the T sounds in here, just because they were hitting the compressor too hard. Like you can kind of see it here. So I've gone through and and I know there's plugins out there now that can do it, so I'll probably pick one of those up. But it was important for me to have those sounding smooth before I even started applying any processing. So the main vocal chain, I'm doing some de-essing first of all, and then I've got this RXD click because there are a few like mouth noises, and that's great at cleaning it up. We have a bit of cleanup EQ first of all. In fact, let's take all this off. So this is the raw vocal. It does have a little bit of compression on the way in and some saturation.
This ends today, night turns today.
So that's obviously, it's going through all the bus processing as well, bear in mind. So let's put in the de-essing and the EQ and see where we're at.
This ends today, night turns today.
So it's cleaned up some of that mud. Then we're hitting our first compressor.
This ends today, night turns today.
Then we are pushing a little bit of top end with the SSL and then controlling it with some multi-band compression.
This ends today, night turns today.
So it's got a lot smoother a lot more expensive sounding. I'm not doing a lot of compression on here at all, but it's just sounding more like a finished vocal. So I'm finishing off the compression with Arvox.
This ends today, night turns today.
Yeah, that's sounding cool. I mean, to be honest, could have finished it there, but we didn't. Adding a little bit more kind of top end sheen with this ozone exciter.
This ends today, night turns today. Have your way.
So that makes a lot of difference to me, taking that in and out. I really like the sound of that. I'm doing a little bit of control with Soothe. I don't always use it on vocals, but I felt it was needed in here.
This ends today, night turns today.
It's more like on the held notes where things kind of poke out and you can see Soothe just sort of helping to duck that down. We're doing a little bit of de-essing, obviously, because we brought up some of the top end. Lastly, a little bit of saturation. I mean, this is on 0. But it just does something even just without applying any. And then we are using the limiter just to control the peaks, make sure it doesn't go over. And this plugin is just, oh right, okay, I think this is just a carryover from other sessions, and it comes on and off if I need to filter some top and low, and so it's not really doing anything. So that is the vocal chain. That's pretty much copied over mostly to the other tracks, but I'm not doing as much of a top end boost on the backing vocals as I do on the main vocal, because I want to stand out a little bit more. The main thing to take away from here is, like, there's a lot of these throws and stuff going on, a lot of different automation. You can see the volume and stuff going up and down in certain sections, but like there's that chorus throw that you can hear that repeats. So what's the bus that's coming on and off? Got so many of them. I think it's this one. Yeah, the chorus delay. So we're going into Echo Boy Jr. with a quarter note delay, but then I'm applying the compressor so that the trail of the delay doesn't become too obvious when the vocal kicks in, because it's kind of hanging over, and that's only kicking in on certain phrases. So let's just move this up so you can see it. You can see where it's coming on there. Okay, so let's see what these do together.
This ends today, night turns today. Have your way, Yahweh. I'll read.
Yeah, sounding great. Just adds this really nice texture to it. We've got a bunch of other backing vocals. Again, they all have kind of similar things. There's some of my vocals in there as well. And then we have these nice little R's at the start, which just add this epic kind of feel to it. They come back in the first chorus as well. They are being bussed together and just processed together with kind of similar plugins. Let's have a listen to those. Sounds really nice. We've got a bunch of different reverbs. I kind of bring these in as part of my template and use them as and when is needed. Like a main vocal reverb, I'll often use this guy, which is just really nice sounding verb, but we've got different throws and stuff. I'm using some parallel, I've called it parallel distortion, but it's parallel compression, but it's also got a bunch of saturation on it, I guess, for the main vocal, just to add some thickness.
Ends today, night turns today.
Just to really thicken up that main vocal. So a couple of things that I really like in this track. There's a little stutter that hits before the second chorus, and it's really simple, and it follows a snare roll. Snare roll is just a 4-stroke. So all I've done is basically go through and just chop out sections of the guitar and the synth and the vocal to create this little stutter effect before that second chorus hits. But it sounds really cool.
this phase me. This ends today.
Such a simple effect, but super effective. So cool that we also added it at the start of the song as well. Love that effect. Then we've got this really nice little breakdown in the middle. So this song obviously is called Breakdown. In the middle, originally it had this big sort of chugging breakdown, and we were reworking the song, and I said, does it really need it, or can we just take it out and go the complete other way and make it this really kind of calm ambient, because the rest of the song is so big, it would be a really nice, because the rest of the song is so big, it'd just be really cool to do something completely the opposite and drop it down. So that's what we did. Coming out of the second chorus, everything just drops back and the cleans kind of poke up through, and you get this really nice little ambient section before the outro. Yeah, it sounds huge, and just in that gap we left it just like a bar extra, just to create a little bit more tension before that last chorus hits. And in that section everything rings out bar that little piano note just playing the same key. And it just adds a little bit of tension, apprehension before the final outro chorus of that song hits. So there you have it. That is Breakdown by For Kingdom's Cause. Hopefully that was interesting and showed you a little bit of insight into what went into the production and the mix of the song. And if you like it, I'll maybe make some more. Go and check out the song. It's on Spotify. Go check it out, and see you soon.